Rome didn't fall to barbarians, it fell to salt taxes. At its height, salt accounted for up to 20% of imperial revenue. This is how a biological necessity became a fiscal weapon. A Roman soldier stands in the forum, filthy from campaign. His commander doesn't hand him gold, he hands him salt. Pure, white, crystalline. More valuable than the life he just risked. This isn't folklore, this is salarium, the salt ration that gave us the word salary. But here's what they don't teach you in economics class. The substance that built Rome's legions, funded its aqueducts, and paved its roads, also engineered its collapse. We think of empires falling to barbarians, to moral decay, to military defeat. We're wrong. Rome fell to salt taxes. This is gold and governance, where wealth meets its dark side. Today, we're dissecting how a biological necessity became a fiscal weapon, how Rome transformed survival into sovereignty, then watched that sovereignty dissolve in the very brine that birthed it. The question isn't why did Rome fall? The question is, how did a mineral make Rome powerful enough to fall from such heights? Because salt didn't just season Rome's food, it seasoned its power structure. And when you build an empire on controlling what people cannot live without, you don't create stability, you create a countdown. Before Rome conquered the world, it conquered a road. The Via Salaria, the salt road, stretching from the salt pans of Ostia at the Tiber's mouth into the Sabine Hills. This wasn't just infrastructure. This was economic strangulation. Tribes couldn't survive without salt. They needed it to preserve meat, cure hides, maintain livestock. Human biochemistry demands sodium. Without it, neural transmission fails, muscles seize, death follows. Rome understood something profound. Control the irreplaceable, control everything. Early Roman kings didn't just tax salt, they monopolized extraction. By 640 BC, Ancus Marcius had fortified Ostia's salt works. Every crystal harvested from those coastal evaporation ponds flowed through Roman hands first. The tribes could trade for it, fight for it, but they couldn't circumvent it. This is the original sin of fiscal imperialism. Watch what happens next. In 506 BC, Rome abolishes direct taxation on its citizens. Sounds progressive? It was brilliant theater. The Roman Republic needed revenue. Wars with the Etruscans were bleeding the treasury, but direct taxes bred resentment. So they did something more insidious. They raised the gabelle, the salt tax. Suddenly, every family buying salt to preserve winter provisions was funding military expansion. They called it vectigalia, indirect taxation. We call it genius. The citizen feels free because you're not reaching into his purse directly. But every meal, every preserved fish, every cured hide is a tribute payment he doesn't recognize. The philosopher Cato the Elder called salt the foundation of the Republic. He was right, but not the way he meant. Salt wasn't Rome's foundation, salt was its fiscal illusion. By 200 BC, a new power structure crystallizes, literally. The publicani, private tax farmers who purchased the right to collect Rome's salt revenues. These weren't bureaucrats, they were financial engineers. They'd bid astronomical sums to the Senate for salt monopoly rights, then squeeze the provinces mercilessly to profit. Sound familiar? It should. This is the birth of the public-private revenue partnership, the original too-big-to-fail entities. When the publicani over-leveraged and couldn't pay Rome, the Senate bailed them out. When they under-collected and blamed it on provincial resistance, Rome sent legions. The empire's military might became the enforcement arm of private revenue collection. Power had migrated. It was no longer in the Senate's marble halls. It lived in the salt merchants' ledgers, in the compound interest on tax farming contracts, in the invisible scaffolding of debt that connected every soldier's salary to a private financier's profit margin. The Republic thought it was governing. it was being governed. Let's get specific. At its height, Rome's salt tax revenue accounted for an estimated 15 to 20% of total imperial income. We're talking billions of sesterces annually across the provinces. To put this in perspective, one modius, roughly 9 liters, of salt cost 4 to 6 sesterces. The average Roman family needed 3 to 4 modi utile. Do the math. A laborer earning 900 sesterces annually was spending 5% of his income on salt alone, before modern income taxes existed. But here's where it gets diabolical. Salt wasn't uniformly priced. Rome practiced regional tax arbitrage. In Egypt, salt was cheap, abundant Nile Delta production. Tax rate? Low. In Gaul and Germania, salt was scarce. Tax rate? 300% higher. Rome wasn't just taxing, it was market-making, artificially creating price differentials to maximize extraction from conquered territories. This is fiscal imperialism's masterwork, turning geography into revenue streams. Now watch the gears mesh. Roman soldiers, paid in salarium, would be posted to frontier provinces. Those provinces paid tribute in salt or coin derived from salt taxes. That salt funded more soldiers to garrison more provinces to extract more salt revenue. It's a closed loop. The empire becomes a perpetual motion machine of extraction and enforcement. Soldiers protect the salt roads. Salt roads generate revenue. Revenue pays soldiers. And at the center of this wheel sits the publicani, taking their cut at every rotation. Who were the real creditors? Not the Senate, not the emperor. The merchant class who financed the initial tax contracts. When Gaius Gracchus tried to reform the system in 123 BC, tried to cap the publicani's rates and redistribute salt revenues to the poor, he was murdered. The Senate called it defending the Republic. It was defending revenue streams. Here's what conventional history tells you. Rome fell because it became decadent. Too many orgies, not enough discipline. Bullshit! Rome fell because it over-leveraged its salt monopoly. By the 3rd century AD, salt tax collection had become so oppressive that entire regions engaged in salt smuggling. Black markets exploded. The Argentari, Roman bankers, began lending against future salt revenues that would never materialize. The state borrowed against non-existent collection projections. Does this sound familiar? It should. When you build fiscal policy on taxing biological necessities, you create an economy of avoidance. People don't stop needing salt, they stop paying your tax. And when that happens, your revenue model doesn't adjust. It collapses. The empire didn't gradually decline. Its revenue structure suddenly broke. The crisis of the 3rd century wasn't a military problem. It was a fiscal implosion. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had 26 emperors. Most ruled less than 3 years. Most died violently. Why? Because they couldn't pay the army. And they couldn't pay the army because salt revenues had evaporated. Provinces had learned to produce salt locally, breaking Rome's extraction monopoly. Egypt, North Africa, Britannia, all developed independent salt works. The Via Salaria, once the lifeline of empire, became just another road. The publicani's contracts became worthless. The Argentari who'd lent against those contracts went bankrupt. Credit dried up. Without credit, Rome couldn't finance frontier defense. Without defense, provinces seceded. Gaul declared independence in 260 AD, Palmyra in the east. The Rhine frontier collapsed, not to military defeat, to fiscal abandonment. Rome couldn't afford to garrison what it claimed to own. Let's talk class. When the salt revenue system collapsed, did the senators suffer? Did the merchant princes who'd profited for centuries face consequences? No. They had optiones, options. Land holdings, diversified income, villas in the countryside. Who suffered? The plebeians, the urban poor who'd relied on grain doles funded by salt taxes. When revenue collapsed, so did the cura annone, Rome's food distribution system. Famine followed, not because food didn't exist, but because the fiscal mechanism to distribute it had broken. This is the eternal pattern. Systems built on taxing necessities privatize gains and socialize collapse. The senators who'd enriched themselves on salt monopolies retired to their estates. The publicani restructured their debts. The common Roman starved in the streets of a city that still called itself an empire. Here's the epilogue you won't find in textbooks. When Constantine refounded Rome as Constantinople in 330 AD, he abolished the salt tax in the new capital. He'd seen what it cost. The new Byzantine economy relied on trade tariffs and land taxes, renewable, adjustable revenue sources. Byzantine Empire lasted another 1,000 years. Western Rome fell in 476 AD. Same culture, same military tradition, different fiscal philosophy. The difference? One built its treasury on flow. The other had built it on control of scarcity. When you monetize what humans cannot refuse, you don't create sustainable governance, you create a ticking clock. Salt made Rome powerful because salt made Rome necessary. But necessity is a double-edged sword. Build your power on what people must have, and you're not governing, you're hostage-taking. Every transaction becomes coercion. Every payment becomes resentment. And when the hostage finds a way to escape, local production, smuggling, substitution, your power evaporates. This is the paradox of resource-based empires. The tighter you grip, the more slips through your fingers. Rome thought it was taxing a commodity. It was taxing biology. And biology finds a way, always. Look around. How many modern governments have built their revenue models on taxing things humans cannot refuse? Fuel, water, electricity, digital infrastructure. Each treated as a fiscal salt mine, a substance too necessary to avoid, too controlled to escape. And each time the same pattern: monopoly, extraction, avoidance, collapse. We haven't learned from Rome. We've digitized it, put a UI on it, called it modernization. But the gears are the same, the circularity's identical, the countdown just as inevitable. Salt built Rome because salt gave Rome power over life itself. Salt destroyed Rome because power over life is an illusion. Life finds alternatives, or life ends the empire. This is gold and governance. If you want to understand why empires crumble before they collapse, why fiscal structures matter more than military strength, why the past is the only map we have for the future, subscribe. Because the next empire that falls won't fall to barbarians, it'll fall to its own tax code. Welcome to the invisible war. Welcome to where wealth meets its dark side.